Good morning, good afternoon, and to some, good evening, depending on where you are on the planet or in your mind. This is the next edition of Community Views and Solutions. I'm your host, Charles X. White, Charity Productions. This is a segment that's an extended segment on scholars, scientists, and practitioners. It has become very obvious to us at Charity Productions over the last 38 years there needs to be a new approach to disparities, reducing inequities, and improving service delivery. All of these and much more involves quality of life, taxpayers getting their money's worth without having to scrimp and save and shout to get some services. And what we have as a result of having people not getting services are descriptors as vulnerable populations, underserved, hard to serve, at risk, red line, disparities, inequities, low performing. All of these negative adjectives and words and phrases that describe a people, primarily African Americans, with impactors on all ethnic groups depending on the geography. We have a map that we want to show you. Mark, will you put up that map with the 25 zip codes that we have identified in Houston, Harris County? There are 25 zip codes that we have identified, and in those 25 zip codes, there seems to be a continuous connection going back 60 to 70 years. And one of the key elements of disparity or inequities is flooding. Why are flooding issues prevailing over a 60-year period of time when there were public dollars allocated to improve the drainage and sewage? As recent as Mayor Parker created a tax, that's not a popular phrase or wording of what she designed or she got approved through council, but in essence, it's a tax and it was to improve drainage and flooding. So we see these efforts, but we don't see the services. And our presenter today, Dr. Amir from Texas A&M University, has developed an app that in future sense and tense, he'll explain that shortly, should help us and help city planners reduce flooding for every area of that particular city. So equity, it was defined as what people need, and equality was defined as giving everybody the same thing. Well, between equity and equality, we not get none of it. But with professors and researchers and scientists' help, which is what Charity Productions' new mission is to couch everything that we do as community science, using scientific principles and aligning ourselves with universities and researchers that can give us empirical data that we can transform into a vehicle through public policy and get more equity and equality. Dr. Amir is here with us today from Texas A&M University, and he's going to introduce his app that we are working with in Houston, Harris County and Charity Productions, that we're going to help spread this app all over the globe. Dr. Amir, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much, Charles. It's an honor to be with you today, and I'm very happy that our work at Texas A&M University has received attention from communities in Houston and from the charity productions. So I think you put it in a very nice way. We have parts in Harris County, in Houston, Galveston areas that are basically considered data deserts. We don't have information about many of these zip codes that you mentioned when it comes to the impact of disasters, particularly floods, and how they have historically caused issues for the communities that are primarily underserved and at-risk communities who live in these neighborhoods. So why do we need data? And what is the problem of having these data deserts in Harris County? You can think about issues such as debris cleanup after a disaster. The city needs to know what type of debris exists in these neighborhoods so that they can decide what type of vehicle they need to send, how many crews they need to send to these areas to clean up the impact of these flood events. Think about saving victims. We need to know what streets, what localities have been historically flooded, and what is the depth of flood water in these neighborhoods so that we can decide whether we can send a Humvee, a boat, a vehicle, or whether simply people can evacuate on foot. None of this data exists to the best of our knowledge, particularly for areas in Houston, Harris County, and Galveston areas. So what my research tries to do is to put new technologies in the hand of citizens, in the hand of these local communities. But in doing so, we are also keeping in mind that the people who are impacted the most by these disasters should not be viewed as a problem in floods or any other type of disasters. They should be part of the solution. So creating human-centered, people-centered technologies that get informed by the needs and expectations of the people who live in these neighborhoods is a number one priority for us. And I think another very important aspect of my work that I would like to highlight here is that by having people as part of the solution, we also expand our reach to these communities. We can collect more representative and inclusive data about how these communities are prepared to fight the disasters and how these communities are prepared to face the future disasters that may happen in their zip codes, in their neighborhoods. If history is a lesson, this past summer, we have witnessed floods and many other types of disasters in parts of the US and globe that have never experienced such disasters. The problem is, historically, we have not been paying attention to many neighborhoods, particularly underserved and at-risk communities when it came to data collection. So when these new events are now taking place, floods, mudslides, hurricanes, tornadoes, in parts of the country from which we don't have data, we simply don't know how to deal with those events. So moving forward, part of our work is, of course, to collect data from these neighborhoods, from these communities, but also go and talk to the people who are impacted the most by these events, because we want to explain to them how the technology works. We want to explain to them what is this data being used for. And this is quite important, because unless we can have the trust of the communities in the type of academic research that we're doing, it is very difficult to have community buy-in. It is very difficult to have their assistance, their help when it comes to data collection. So again, going towards the human-centered approaches is a cornerstone in my research. And that's why when we started this project on flood mitigation using artificial intelligence, the fundamental aspect of the work was crowdsourcing. We simply did not want to collect all the data by ourselves. I didn't want to send my own students or my own researchers to the field to collect the data. we wanted to explain the value of this work to the communities through the help of people like yourself, so that they understand that even if they share with us one photo or a 5-second video of their neighborhood when it was experiencing a flood event, we can put that photo into a very good use. Of course, if thousands of people help us, we now have thousands of photos that we can put into a map. We can try to analyze the photos. We can find the impact of the flood in a particular neighborhood from which we have collected these photos. And then we can display this information in near real time to those communities, but also to anyone else around the country and around the world, to understand and appreciate the risk that these floods are creating for the communities. In many parts of the country, the problem is people who have been exposed to disasters in their lifetimes have a higher threshold when it comes to describing the risk or their perceptions about the risk. So a person who has never seen a flood may think that 2 inches of flood is a lot of water. But a person who has been raised in a part of the country, in the coastal areas, that has experienced floods pretty much every year, for him or her, 2 inches of water may not be too much. And as a result of this variable risk perception, what happens is that different parts of the country, when it comes to policymaking, or even different parts of a county, when it comes to policymaking, will have different perspectives. And it's very difficult to bring everybody to a common platform unless you really document and show the impact of these 2 inches of water or 3 inches of water on many of these people who live in these neighborhoods. So our application tries to also document the historical impact of floods in different parts of the country, and particularly being here in College Station, we are focusing on Harris County, Galveston, Corpus Christi, other smaller coastal areas of Texas, where they have been impacted historically disproportionately by the impact of these floods. So if you want, I can go ahead and explain how the app works and how the research works, and then if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer those.
Okay. Let me ask this question before you do that. Explain data deserts.
So data deserts are basically areas of our communities from which we have very little historical information or data about, for example, the likelihood of a disaster occurring or the extent of damage in past disasters.
Wait right there. Mm-hmm. So what do counties and cities use to do that planning and projections if they don't have the data? What we're talking about now, is a new tool that should help save lives. Are we on the same page with that?
Exactly.
Okay.
And the way currently things work in many parts of the country where we don't have access to community level data is that city planners, decision makers, authorities rely on the existing infrastructure that is in place. So a good example when it comes to flood events are flood gauges. I mean, being close to Houston, flood gauges are something that everybody has heard about. But how many of them have you actually seen? How many of them are actually in your neighborhoods? Very few. So we did some research about the number of flood gauges that are in operation in the US. And guess what? There are less than 10,000 of them. These are flood gauges that are operated by the US Geological Survey. USGS operates less than 10,000 flood gauges nationwide. So maybe 10,000 seems like a large number, but if you do a simple math, that basically means for every 400 square mile of land in this country, there's only one flood gauge. So guess what? If we have one data point for every 400 square miles, that means for the extent of that area, what scientists need to do, they have to do extrapolation or interpolation or make mathematical models or simulations. So a lot of assumptions need to be made in order to be able to cover expanded land for which we have one real data point that comes from a flood gauge.
Now, what you just said, I experienced that like this. There was a a government employee that goes to all these disaster meetings and plannings and conferences and all of that. I asked him one time, I said, how do you all make decisions and you don't involve input from the community? His response was, when we are at those meetings, we, the bureaucrats that were at those planning meetings, he said that they are the community at that time and they make the decision. So that matches what you just said about not having enough data ports to collect, to making a up-to-date decision and dealing with the real numbers in real time. So how much, before you show an example, what would your futuristic projection be on how beneficial the app would be to city and county planners?
That's a great question. And for that, perhaps I need to explain a little bit how this app works, what are the foundations of this app, and what is it that we do differently. And
please do.
The best way to do this is considering your daily commute from home to work in Houston, Galveston, anywhere else, and try to remember how many times you see a stop sign during your commute. If you have a 20-minute commute, 1-hour commute, just count the number of stop signs. Okay? Now, if you imagine if a system exists that can turn these stop signs into flood sensors without really having to install any new equipment, without really having to do anything new, now imagine how much more data we have just for your daily commute from home to work, how many points we can collect when it comes to depth of flood water, instead of having one sensor per 400 square miles. So this is the foundation of our work. We are relying on existing landmarks, such as traffic signs, because everybody is familiar with them. Everybody knows where they're installed. We have stop signs in pretty much all intersections. Some of them are two-way stop signs, some of them are four-way stop signs. And regardless of age, gender, place of birth, socioeconomic status, people can relate to traffic signs because they have either to drive, to walk, to bike. So this is the foundation of the app. Now, how do we think this being different from the current method? Well, instead of us going around and trying to find where these stop signs is, we have created an app, a crowdsourcing application called BluePix, and we ask citizens to simply take photos of these stop signs along their way and share it with us.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. You ask the citizens to take a photo. Do you mean before a flood or during a flood or after a flood?
So the system works in this way. It basically compares the photo of a stop sign before a flood to a photo of the same stop sign during the flood. And by doing this comparison, it tells us exactly how much flood existed at the location of the stop sign. So the way we are trying to have the help of our citizen scientists is that if they can send a photo to us before a flood, perfect. We store that photo in our database and we use it in a future event. If they can send a photo of a stop sign during a flood where the stop sign is submerged in water, that's even better, because now we can compare that submerged stop sign photo with a photo of the same sign that we have previously stored, or we can simply use a mapping software such as Google Street View and find that stop sign. And now we have two photos of the same stop sign before and after a flood.
Question, Doc.
And now,
question. When they take the photo, do you want the photo with the street showing visibly, or it's not necessarily, you don't necessarily need the name of the street on top of the stop sign?
That's a great question, Charles. So most of the current smartphones that we are using or tablet devices, they have built-in position sensors, or as we know, GPS devices. If your GPS is on, all you need to do is just to take a photo, because when you take that photo, the photo comes with the positional information, longitude and latitude automatically. If your GPS is off because you simply don't want to turn it on for privacy reasons, then as you see in this example, take a photo of a sign where the street signs are visible to us so we can find exactly what intersection that photo comes from, or take a photo in a way that we can see in the background some famous landmark, for example, a school or a church or any other landmark that we can then use to find the location of that photo. Once we find the location of the photo, the technology that we have developed does the rest of the work. So perhaps the most important thing that citizens needs to keep in mind is that we would like your photos, please share them with us, but share them with us in a way that we know where that photo was taken, whether it's a GPS data of your phone, if the GPS is on, or take the photo in a way that we can locate it in our mapping software.
Okay, what about you have a photo, but you have no street indication? Now, I'm talking from what our group is going to be doing. So somebody from our group takes a photo, no sign, no landmark, and can we send you the name of the street if you identify we have a photo that came in, and you know, if we know who sent it in, because we will know which people are sending in, can we just send you the name of the street and the cross section?
Absolutely. So if when the photo is being uploaded, you can add a note to the photo. You can simply change the name of the file to include the name of the street. All of these are possibilities.
Okay.
Because on the receiving end of it, a person like myself or a trained student that works on the app can simply read that photo either from the file name, from the note, and then identify where that photo was taken. Now, because of the nature of this app, that is a crowdsourcing application, let's say none of this works, we can still use that photo. We simply put it out for everybody else to see and help us if they can tell us where that photo was taken.
Oh, you do a treasure hunt.
Yes, it's like a Pokemon Go.
Right. Okay, now, so let's talk about how long will let's say we send you 500, 1,000 addresses in Port Arthur, Houston, wherever we send them from, right?
Mm-hmm.
How long is it going to take before you can give us a report on what we did?
So currently, the way the system works, there's a human on the receiving end, that is typically me or a student of mine. We manually go through each of these photos to make sure that the photos we are receiving depict the stop sign, the photos that we're receiving do not have any privacy issues. And then if those tests are passed, we post the photo immediately on the app. So the photo itself will be on the app pretty fast, in a matter of minutes. The back end is a technology, in this case, an artificial intelligence model, that essentially compares the pre-flood photo and the post-flood photo and gives us an estimate of the depth of water at the location of the sign. That may take a few minutes to a few hours, depending on how frequently we run the application. But there is nothing that keeps the app from being a real-time application. If we have a need in a certain event or a certain occasion to have this data back to the communities in a fast pace, that can be done, because the computer model is a fast and robust model that can do all these calculations in a pretty high speed. And the way the model really works here is that it tries to find this red octagonal shape of the stop sign, as you can see in this example. And to the surprise of many people, these stop signs are actually standardized and regulated. So the size of the sign, the red part of the sign, is constant regardless of where you are, which zip code you live in. In residential areas, the sign is 30 inches tall and 30 inches wide. In highways, the signs are a little bit bigger. They are 36 inches tall and 36 inches wide. But these are the two most common sizes that we have for a stop sign. So when the computer model finds the sign, it also counts how many pixels, these are the units of display, the sign occupies on that photo. And then the model knows that this sign was taken in a residential area. So that corresponds to 30 inches. And based on that, it comes up with this mathematical ratio. And then what the model does, it looks under the sign and tries to find a very slim, narrow object that resembles the pole. And the pole is of interest to us because when you have flood, part of the pole is under the water. In this example you see here on the top, only a part of the pole is visible to the model. Whereas if you look at the same stop sign before the flood, the entire pole is visible to the model. So once the model detects this pole in pre-flood and post-flood situations, then it compares the length of the pole in these two scenarios, and the difference in the length of the pole is how much of the pole is not visible, meaning how much of the pole is under the water. So this is how we get an estimate of the depth of the flood water. And this number, whether it's 2 inches, 6 inches, 10 inches, or multiple feet, will be displayed if the user clicks on those blue pins on the map. So then the user knows that in this event, on this date, at this location, there has been 5 inches of flood at that particular stop sign. Now, compare that to the flood gauge situation. We have, let's say, tens or hundreds of them around Houston area, but we have thousands or tens of thousands of stop signs in Houston area. So if we can potentially do this using the help of ordinary people and communities for all stop signs in Houston in a single event, then we have a very high spatial resolution flood map that we can share back with the communities, with the authorities, with whoever needs resources and information to help them in the aftermath of a flood.
Let me ask this, going back to the data deserts, is Houston unique in not having data of this type for the neighborhoods labeled vulnerable, or is this a common occurrence across the nation?
So data deserts are not unique to Houston. We have data deserts in pretty much every part of the country and many parts of the globe. Houston is quite unique in the sense that we have a large portion of the population that is first generation immigrant, non-English speaker, and underserved historically for various reasons. And when it comes to the distribution of housing resources, flood gauges, community resources in these communities, we have a little bit of a skewed outcome because we have very good neighborhoods in Houston from which we have large data. We have neighborhoods in Houston that are more prone to disasters for which we have smaller amount of data or data that is more sparse. So we are focusing on Houston, obviously, because of the location of where we are in Texas A&M, and we have a deep interest in Houston communities and zip codes, but also because of the uniqueness of the population that lives in Houston. And another thing I want to add here is that the models that have been developed over time, many of them become obsolete because of the fact that these large metropolitan areas go through a lot of renovation projects. There are new highways, there are new housing developments. So as a result of that, what happens is that we have a change of surface properties in many parts of our community. So for example, historically in a particular neighborhood, we had grass, we had gravel. Now all of a sudden they come and pave that with asphalt. So what happens is because you're changing the material of the surface, all the assumptions that your models used to make about the infiltration rate or the permeability of the surface material when it comes to runoff water, now all of a sudden all of that changes. And usually there is a gap between when these surfaces change, meaning when you have these new development projects in Houston, and how frequent the models are updated. And that creates a problem because we're still using models that were developed, let's say 15 years ago, 20 years ago. Whereas if you drive in Houston, every day there is a new project.
Right.
And many of these projects happen in many parts of these zip codes that you demonstrated. And as a result of that, the robustness of these mathematical models is sometimes under question.
So Dr. Amir, let me ask this. is it anything else that you want to add to this conversation? Because we have like 5 more minutes showing. And I also want to invite you back as a continuation as we progress with this, so we'll keep the public updated on our progress. So give us some essential knowledge you want us to have as a closing.
Sure. Maybe I can start by saying that there is research that shows that the economic cost of flooding would triple in the next 10 years. So whatever difficulty we have been facing with so far with floods in Houston, times that by 3, and imagine what can happen now in the next decade. And on top of that, we have the cascading effect of disasters. Now we have extreme heat in Texas. And then on top of that, we had floods in Dallas area, in North Texas, just a couple of days ago. So now we have multiple extreme events happening for the same location at the same time, which is putting extra burden on communities, on authorities, on decision makers in the next years and next decade. So we have to be aware of that. I think what I would really like to do with this project is I want to get the message across that technology can be a tool to help communities. And there is a historical precedence to some of this technology-based research because people tend to trust technology very selectively. We may trust our smartphones, but if somebody comes with a smartphone to our home or to our place of work and wants to take a few photos, all of a sudden we don't trust them. So it's the same technology. A smartphone is a smartphone, but the way it is being used or it's being promoted makes a huge difference psychologically in some of these communities. So I really want to try to talk to these communities, to reach out to the members of the public and show them that these new technologies such as mobile devices, artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, these are here to help us and these are here to augment our capacities to fight disasters. And humans by themselves may not be able to do it. Technology by itself obviously cannot do it because we need inclusive representative data to create these technologies. So my goal is really to bring humans and technologies together to create a hybrid approach to fighting disasters in the future.
Well, that's a pretty good summary. We're going to close this segment and thank Dr. Amir for being here from Texas A&M and introducing this new technology related to capturing data about flooding. Hopefully, we will do that and we will have a more robust technology up to date to help the city or the county or even FEMA for that matter plan for disasters because of the rapid repetitiveness of these disasters coming in. And hopefully the city and the county will do their due diligence and take the pressure off of vulnerable populated neighborhoods. We're going to close this segment of Community Views and Solutions. I'm Charles X. White, your host. We'll see you next time. Thank you.